More questions about now retired Manitowoc County Lieutenant Andy Colborn and his role in the Teresa Halbach murder case, as depicted in the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer, today on The Jim Hagerty Show. Welcome back, everybody, to another special report on the Steven Avery murder case, which, of course, is still in the headlines now that Convicting a Murderer has dropped its finale over on Daily Wire Plus. Of course, Convicting a Murderer is the 10-part rebuttal to Making a Murderer, which Convicting a Murderer filmmakers claim duped millions of people into believing Steven Avery and his nephew Brendan Dassey were framed. Again, fair disclosure, I do have a role in Convicting a Murderer. After Making a Murderer dropped nearly 8 years ago, I started investigating whether Avery and Dassey were wrongfully convicted while reporting my findings for various publications. And my investigative anecdotes are sprinkled throughout the rebuttal series. Now, before I get into the main takeaway of Convicting a Murderer episode 10, the finale, I'm going to answer a question, actually 4 questions, that were recently asked by a viewer in a comment. Anthony Hills, 2024, asks, who says the car's here in the background of Andy Colborn's call to dispatch? Why did Andy use a cell phone to call dispatch rather than the radio? Why didn't the prosecution supply all audio to the defense prior to trial as required by law? And why is there no audio from the 4th? Well, thank you, Anthony, for the question. And before I unpack that, I can say this was a red flag moment for me as when I watched Making a Murderer, as a reporter and as a regular citizen, as a true crime buff, as someone who was just looking for something to binge in late December 2015. I watched this and I couldn't really believe it. They seemed to have this guy, this innocent looking sheriff's deputy, was wringing his hands during questioning, and they seem to just have this guy, caught in a lie, right? And of course, they accuse Colborn of orchestrating the surreptitious finding of Teresa Halbach's car. And of course, they left viewers, at least they left me, with wondering if police could plant the car, plant the key, maybe plant the blood. There's no telling what they do to ensure that Steven Avery was convicted of the Halbach murder. Now, let's jump in. Now, in a nutshell, Andy Colborn is accused of being with the real killer on November 4th, 2005. That is when some Making a Murderer reviewers and web sleuths claim he helped plant the car and he took possession of the key, which some still say he planted in Avery's bedroom. Now, of course, November 4th is the day he allegedly called dispatch on a cell phone to verify the license plates, and we'll get into that. But first, let's tackle the first part of Anthony's question, his compound question. Who yelled, "The car's here," in the background of Colborn's call? That's the first part of the question. Now, I did a brief segment on this in episode 6 of my coverage of episode 6 of Convicting a Murderer after that dropped. However, I didn't really cover a certain detail, so I want to do that. So here that is. According to the recording of Colborn's call to dispatch that Making a Murderer played in the documentary, Colborn asked dispatch to run the plates, and the dispatcher immediately gives it to him. If you listen closely, someone says something in the background, but because the audio has been enhanced, it's tough to make out, but someone does say something in the background.
Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, this is Lynn.
Lynn.
Hi, Andy.
Can you run Sam William Henry 582?
Okay, it shows that she's a missing person, and it lists to Teresa Halbach.
Okay.
Okay, that's what you're looking for, Andy?
99 Toyota.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
Now, Kathleen Zellner claims the person in the background is saying it's hers, according to a 2017 motion in which she stopped short of accusing Ryan Hilligus of killing Teresa Halbach. Of course, Ryan Hilligus is Teresa Halbach's ex-boyfriend, and some Making a Murderer sleuths who vow to crack the case believe that the person in the background could be Hilligus or Teresa's roommate, Scott Bladorn, with whom she allegedly had a romantic relationship. But that's really never been confirmed. It's never really been an issue for me, whether that happened or not. But these two guys are still central in the theory that they gave Andy Colborn the key and that Colborn planted it. Now, let's examine this call. Now, in Making a Murderer, the filmmakers depicted that this call was played at trial. They actually showed the trial, and they depicted this was the call being played as Andy Colborn was on the witness stand. However, that's not accurate. What was in Making a Murderer was just a clip of the actual call. Now, the entire call was played at trial.
Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, this is Lynn.
Sam,
Hi, Andy.
can you run Sam William Henry 582? See if he comes back today.
Sam William Henry 582. I need telephone, please. Oh, ready. Do you speak any Spanish there, Andy? I'm just going to call him the top of the list. It's fine. On call, didn't call me back. And when I get in trouble, Andy, I get in trouble. You know? What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
My favorite one is in the city of Manitowoc. Yes. Okay, shows that she's a missing person. And it lists to Teresa Halbach.
Okay.
Okay, that's what you're looking for, Andy?
99 Toyota.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
You're so welcome. Bye-bye.
So according to the entire call, the background noise was there. There was no doubt about it. There were several people talking in the background. However, the voices were coming from the Manitowoc County Dispatch Center. They weren't coming from anywhere near Andy Colborn because Andy Colborn was sitting inside his squad car alone when he made the license plate call. He was outside of George Zipperer's home waiting for backup officers to arrive so he could go home. So, to answer Anthony's question, the first part, who yelled, "It's hers," or "the car's here," well, according to the trial transcripts and the call that was actually played at trial, the call in its entirety, nobody said anything of the sort. So, before we jump into the second part of the question, keep in mind now, all of this, including this call, the trial transcripts, all of this, has been public information for nearly 20 years. Anybody in the public could have gotten all of this, and they eventually did after Making a Murderer, a sizable crowdfunding effort. Obtained all of it. All of it is out there. I got it fairly quickly as a reporter, but now all of it is out there. Now, keep in mind, some of the stuff is redacted. Some of it is edited for various reasons. But let's jump into the second part of the question, and that is from Anthony. Why did Andy use a cell phone to call dispatch rather than the radio? Now, Colborn, he answers this in Convicting a Murderer, episode 6. Now, he used his department-issued phone that was assigned to his squad car out of caution. His thought was, he said, is that if Teresa Halbach was being held against her will, he didn't want to put it out there that police were actively looking for her in case her kidnapper had a police scanner. Now, that response has been met with criticism because by the time Andy made the call, the sheriff had already sent out information to the media indicating that Halbach had been missing, including a description of her car. This, scoffers say, indicates that Colborn is lying. However, as a patrol sergeant with Manitowoc County, Colborn, although he may have known about a missing person, he likely wouldn't have known everything the sheriff in Calumet County is communicating to the media. You know, that's something that happens on the administrative level, not the street level, and what's in the news is not going to be picked up by a police scanner. Now, keep in mind, the missing persons call was initiated in Calumet County by Teresa Halbach's mother. And this was just a few hours after she made this report. She was reported missing earlier in the night, and this was just a few hours afterwards. And it was November 3rd. Now, it was not the 4th. Now, phone records eventually did show that Colborn made this call on November 3rd. On November 4th, he was off. Now, for the third part of the question, why didn't the prosecution supply all audio to the defense prior to trial as required by law? Now, Anthony, I'm not exactly sure what you mean here. However, I will venture to guess that you're talking about audio pertaining to the license plate call. And to that, I will just repeat that the full recording of this call, the one that was actually played at trial, was, in fact, turned over to the defense. In fact, it was the defense who played this during trial. Now, for the fourth part of the question, why is there no audio from the 4th? Well, there's no audio between Colborn and dispatch on the 4th because Andy, again, made the call on the 3rd. And again, phone records have proven this. Now, again, Colborn was off on the 4th, so there wouldn't be any audio. Now, there were calls to dispatch both Calumet County and Manitowoc County on the 4th pertaining to the Halbach case, and all of that is out there. Now, another question I have gotten over the years is why Andy Colborn never addressed where he was when he made the call, the license plate call. Why doesn't he address that at trial? And now the answer to this question kind of fits into the way this part of the case, or part of the trial, was depicted in Making a Murderer. And it's a fair question because of how this was depicted. Now, if you look at the trial transcripts, Colborn was never asked where he was specifically. He was just asked, was he looking at the license plates on the Toyota? He only said that to the best of his recollection, he made the call on the 3rd. Now, if you look back at the trial transcripts again, and you look back at some of the comments that have been made about this matter over the years, especially a comment that Ken Kratz does make in episode 9, it mirrors what he actually told me in 2017 during one of my interviews with him. And that is Dean Strang is the one who made this an issue at trial. It wasn't really an issue whatsoever until Strang started accusing Andy Colborn of looking at the license plate. And if you compare the trial transcripts with what we see in Making a Murderer, you'll see that what was in the documentary was very different from how these exchanges actually happened in court. So let's review. In Making a Murderer, Buting asked Colborn during cross-examination, quote, well, you can understand how someone listening to that, meaning the call, might think that you were calling in a license plate that you were looking at on the back end of a 1999 Toyota. From listening to that tape, you can understand why someone might think that, can't you? End quote. Now, in Making a Murderer, Colborn, after wringing his hands and pausing for 4 or 5 seconds, finally says, yes. Now, he actually says yes. However, at trial, how it really played out, Kratz objected to the question, and the judge sustained the objection. In other words, Colborn never answered that question. The yes was cut from another line of questioning and pasted in where the objection was. That was to get viewers to believe Colborn admitted to looking suspicious, but in reality, the exchange as depicted in Making a Murderer never happened at trial. Now, of course, the transcripts show that Colborn goes on to testify that his call to verify the license plates wasn't suspicious at all, and it was just like many others he has made over the years as a patrol officer. Thank you, Anthony, for the questions. I hope that clears some things up for you. So, Convicting a Murderer, Episode 10, the finale. What's the takeaway here? Now, based on my coverage, this case over the years, I would just say there are viewers who say they'd convict Avery and Dassey if they were on the juries today, now that they've seen Convicting a Murderer. I've talked to several of them, and of course, there are still viewers on the fence, which of course can be expected. And there are going to be folks who never doubted Avery and Dassey's guilt. They may not even watch Making a Murderer. Maybe they watched it just for pure entertainment to see how the case was spun. And then we certainly have those who will never believe Avery and Dassey had thing one to do with the murder of Teresa Halbach and will fight to their death defending that position regardless of what they're presented with that shows otherwise. Now, that said, there's a big question here. Does it still warrant the question of who the true villain is in this story? So let's unpack that before we wrap up this series on Convicting a Murderer and the Making a Murderer saga. Now, I've heard Ricciardi and Demos say over the years several times that they went to great lengths to show both sides of the Steven Avery case. Now, this is very well documented. They went on a press tour that lasted at least a year or two, and they're still getting big money for speaking engagements. But according to jail calls between the filmmakers and Steven Avery, including the one that played at the end of episode 9 of Convicting a Murderer, Ricciardi and Demos were huge Avery supporters. Now, this call happened after Dassey confessed and the evidence started to make sense. In other words, it's when the pieces started to fall into place that Avery was the main perpetrator in Halbach's death. As some say, the filmmakers knew they had a decision to make. Do they actually make the documentary that truly does show both sides? Or do they make a piece that panders to the growing innocence movement that has meant millions of dollars in lawsuits and movie paydays for lawyers, journalists, and filmmakers, regardless if Stephen Avery killed Teresa Halbach and Brendan Dassey played a role?
I guess, the issue is there can be a truth, but then there can be the whole truth. And I think part of the truth can be if you want people to know that you're innocent. And then another part of the truth can be what actually happened. People may never know what actually happened. So, would it be enough for you, for people to merely believe that you're innocent?
Now, we also see in episode 10 of Convicting a Murderer, documents and phone calls that I've seen over the years suggest that Ricciardi and Demos were actually investigating the case for the defense. And that Netflix, which has claimed over the years that it had nothing to do with the production of Making a Murderer, wanted the filmmakers to make Stephen Avery a sympathetic character. Now, based on emails obtained during discovery, Netflix producers found it important to also make it appear that cops planted evidence to corroborate Stephen Avery's claims, even if those claims weren't accurate. All of that and more is in Convicting a Murderer, Episode 10. You decide. And that marks the end of our time, at least for this case, my coverage on Convicting a Murderer, the series. Now, I will continue to have spot coverage on Convicting a Murderer, including upcoming chats with those who created the docuseries. But until then, join me next week as I start a new series on a more than 30-year-old missing persons case out of rural Illinois. This series is based on print coverage I did about the mysterious disappearance of 21-year-old Veronica Bloomhurst, a grocery store clerk who left her job in the early hours of September 21st, 1990, and was never seen again. Did she run away, or was something much more sinister at work in the small town of Mendota? Find out in part 1 next week. But in the meantime, have a grand old time on this thing we call Al Gore's Internet.